Hello and welcome to this How to Answer guide to History Around Us, Helmsley Castle. So for history around us, Helmsley Castle, questions are set on the following criteria. So you need to make sure that you're aware of these different criteria and how to answer questions on them. So the reasons for location of the site within its surroundings, when and why people first create the site, the ways in which the site has changed over time, how the site has been used throughout its history, the diversity of activities and people associated with the site, the reasons for changes to the site and to the way it was used, significant times in the site's past, peak activity, major developments and turning points. Remember, the turning point that we always write about is the English Civil War for Helmsley Castle. Significance of specific features in the physical remains at the site, the importance of the whole site either locally or nationally as appropriate, the typicality of the site based on a comparison with other similar sites. So we compare it to Scarborough Castle, Pickering Castle and Alnwick Castle. What the site reveals about everyday life, attitudes and values in particular periods of history. How the physical remains may prompt questions about the past and how historians frame these as valid historical inquiries. How the physical remains can inform artistic reconstructions and other interpretations of the site. And the challenges and benefits of studying the historic environment. Okay, in terms of the rubric of the exam, you'll have to complete two 25-mark questions from a choice of three, and you have 1 hour to do that. Each question carries 5 SPAG marks, and therefore it's 20 marks for the essay, plus the 5 additional SPAG marks. You can see here what the exam will actually look like, and in the instructions, it says to you, you must clearly state the name of the site you've studied at the start of each answer. So you would write, obviously, Helmsley Castle, and you should make it clear in your answers which specific time in your site's history you are referring to as well. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. So just to reinforce, you're going to complete 2 questions from a choice of 3. For Helmsley Castle history around us, some of the questions ask you to choose a time period. So if that happens in a question, here's what to do. The first thing to say is that you can choose your time period. So try and think of time periods for Helmsley, such as the following. Maybe the De family, the 13th century, the 14th century, Tudor times, the era of the English Civil War. And you can see the next slide just to find out a little bit more information about those different time periods. Have a brief introduction where you make it clear which time period you have chosen. Use a phrase such as, the time period I have chosen is Helmsley Castle during the middle of the 17th century during the English Civil War. Once you've chosen your time period, you can only write about this time period. You will not get marks for anything you write about that is not within this time period. There is no specified time limit for a time period. It could be relatively short, such as the English Civil War, or it could be quite long, such as Helmsley Castle during the 13th and 14th centuries. Be really clear on the different time periods as part of your revision. And here's just a reminder of the timeline slide that we've used quite a lot of times just to think about all the different time periods that exist for history around us. So it's worth thinking about things like the era of the De family, Helmsley Castle in medieval times, Helmsley Castle in Tudor times, Helmsley Castle during the 17th century. Also thinking about Helmsley Castle in the 13th century or the 14th century is quite useful as well. And this is where you need to have really, really good key knowledge of chronology for the course. So this slide just tells you how to answer the Helmsley Castle questions, starting off with some steps for success. First of all, what's really important is to decode the question, be really clear on what it's asking you to do, and make sure you regularly link back to the question in your answer, and make sure you are fully answering the question when you are writing your answer. Make a very quick plan. You're looking for 3 developed explanations. You're going to have a single line introduction that clarifies the question and identifies the time period if that's required for the question. And then you need to write 3 well-explained paragraphs. Each paragraph must include detailed and specific knowledge, analysis and explanation, and links to site and source evidence. Now, there are actually 10 of the 20 marks available for using site and source evidence. This is absolutely crucial that you are explaining what the site evidence can reveal to you about the actual site in question and how it can help you to answer the questions. And we'll look at some examples of that in a moment. You can include a conclusion, but you don't have to. So if you don't have time to write one, then that's absolutely fine. As we've seen, each question is worth 20 marks, 30 minutes on each essay, and there's 5 SPAG marks available as well. In terms of the levels, if you just describe the site and make unsupported assertions that you don't really back up your points with any evidence, you're going to get level 1 to 4 marks. If you have a basic explanation but you don't really sustain any explanations, that's called a level 2, 5 to 8 marks. If you have one sustained explanation, you get level 3, 9 to 12 marks. 2 sustained explanations is level 4, 13 to 16 marks. And 3 sustained explanations is level 5, 17 to 20 marks. So you are looking to have 3 really good paragraphs within your answer. As we've seen, cite evidence is absolutely crucial, so there's some useful phrases there to help you to use cite and also source evidence within your answers. So you can use some of those phrases, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this presentation. Okay, so what you need to do when you start off the exam is you need to really decode the exam question. It's really important to do this. I'm going to show you how to do this now. So let's have a look at this question. It says, choose a turning point in your site's history. Explain how and why this changed the importance of the site, either locally or nationally. Then it says at the bottom, use physical features of the site as well as your knowledge to support your answer. It's worth 20 marks, 5 spag marks. So let's see how you can decode it. Now, quite often Helmsley Castle questions can be actually quite complex, so it's really important to take the time to decode the question. So underline or highlight key parts of the question. So if I was decoding this question, these are the parts that I would highlight. And I might even bullet point some notes around it. So choose a turning point. The turning point is always the English Civil War for Helmsley Castle in your site's history. And then explain how and why. So emphasis on how and why means that you've got to be able to show how the site changed, but also why it changed. So this gives you a clue in terms of the relevant second order concepts to write about. So in this answer, the second order concepts are change and continuity, but also causation. So you need to write about that. The word changed as well, I've also highlighted. And you also need to think about the importance of the site, either locally or nationally. So you can think about, you can actually write about both local impact and national impact, but you can write a little bit about historical significance here as well. So you can really get lots of second order concepts within your answer. And really the second order concepts are just a clue for you to write about analytical historical language and really show some thinking around the site. When it says physical features of the site, that's a reminder for you that you must refer to site evidence as well as your knowledge. That's a clue and reminder to include specific and relevant knowledge. And then of course the spag marks, the only part of your GCSE actually where the spag, spelling, punctuation and grammar, is assessed. So once you've really decoded the question and thinking about what you're looking for, what you're then going to be trying to write about is give 3 examples of how the English Civil War represented a turning point in your site's history. So one of the things to think about is about making a quick plan to help you focus the question and organise your answer, and that helps with your initial thinking. So you can have a brief introduction if necessary, such as explaining which time period you have chosen. Not all questions required to do that, but for this question, you might have a brief introduction explaining that you're going to be writing about the English Civil War. Then you need 3 different paragraphs that you're going to write about: a first sustained explanation, a second sustained explanation, and a third sustained explanation. And what we mean by a sustained explanation is that you have a paragraph that includes specific and relevant knowledge, that you include analysis using relevant SOC, second order concept, and historical language, and you also refer to site and source evidence. Just as a guide for you, you basically get 5 marks for your use of knowledge, 5 marks for your use of analysis, and 10 marks for your use of site and source evidence. So in a nutshell, if you don't use site evidence, you are not going to do very well on this question, and you will not get probably beyond about 8 marks out of 20, and that's if you've done actually quite well. So you need to make sure you're using site and source evidence. That's absolutely crucial. So we'll look at an example answer here. So you've got a checklist for the question, so including information from the correct time period. If the question asks you to choose a time period, make it clear which time period you've chosen. Use precise and relevant knowledge. Use site evidence and source evidence throughout your answer. Use historical language and refer to second order concepts to help you analyse and draw conclusions. You need 3 sustained explanations, and make clear links back to the question to ensure you are answering what is being asked, and that's usually going to be done at the start of your paragraph. There's some really nice words there to help you to use site evidence. And so what we've got now is we've got an example answer for this question. We've got 3 paragraphs here, And we've highlighted it just to show you where we are using analysis, where we're using knowledge, and where we are using cite and source evidence. And you can see that in order to have a sustained explanation, you need to have the green, which is knowledge, the yellow, which is cite evidence and source evidence, and the blue, which is historical language and your analysis and your links to second order concepts. So let's just read the first sustained explanation, the first paragraph. The English Civil War was a turning point in the history of Helmsley Castle. So there you've got a nice link to the question. This is because it represented a significant change in the castle's history, going from a domestic to military use. Site evidence reveals that prior to the English Civil War, Helmsley Castle had a domestic use. A study of the physical evidence of the Great Hall and the buildings of the kitchen, pantry and buttery close to the West Tower, where the Lords of Helmsley reside, shows this. Furthermore, in the 16th century, the Manners family remodelled the west range of the castle into a Tudor mansion. A study of the site demonstrates this, as it was an Elizabethan mansion house. Original footings for a Tudor-style gallery can be found, as well as decorative interiors such as ornamental plasterwork and friezes. This underlines the domestic role of the castle prior to the English Civil War. Source evidence of an inventory of 1636 describes the furniture as old. This suggests the castle was decreasing in importance just before the English Civil War, but when the English Civil War broke out, the castle was garrisoned by royalist forces and then besieged in 1644. This represents a truly dramatic turning point in how the castle was used, moving from domestic to military. Now, just a little bit of comment on that. The best answers are the ones that take the site evidence but then draw conclusions from the site evidence. So if you just have a look in the 7th line where it says ornamental plasterwork and friezes, and then the bit where it says this underlines the domestic role, so you're combining your analysis with your site evidence, that's where you're going to get your best answer. So that's the first paragraph. Second paragraph. The second reason why the English Civil War was a turning point is due to the seismic change that the siege of Helmsley Castle brought about when Parliamentary Commander Thomas Fairfax ordered the East Tower to be slighted and the curtain walls brought down in November 1644. Site evidence reveals this in the unexploded mortar bomb, which has been found and is now housed in the museum. Furthermore, fragments and remains of the great walls of the East Tower still remain within the ditches of the castle. This reveals the scale of the impact of the slighting of the East Tower. This underlines just how dramatic a change and turning point it was. A study of the current site shows the height and scale of the East Tower. The fact that it was slighted was a hugely significant event and a turning point in the history of the castle. Historians can use site evidence to infer there would have been a loud explosion heard from miles around. In an instant, the imposing and intimidating East Tower had been partially destroyed. The tower had stood since its construction in the Middle Ages by the De Roos family. The slighting would have changed people's perception of the castle locally, and it was nationally significant in that it represented Parliament's forces taking control of another Yorkshire fortification. Therefore, the event was a turning point, as it was significant locally and nationally in the English Civil War in Yorkshire, paving the way for Parliament to take control of Scarborough Castle further east. Okay, so our last paragraph, a third reason why the English Civil War was a turning point was because it resulted in permanent and lasting change to the use and purpose of Helmsley Castle. This underlines how much of a turning point it was. Site evidence shows the rubble of the East Tower is still within the ditch of the castle, which reinforces how the castle fell into ruin as a result of its slighting during the English Civil War. The consequence of the slighting was that it meant that Helmsley Castle could no longer be used as a military fortress, and indeed the now ruined nature of the building meant that subsequent owners did not want to live in it. In the early 18th century, the Duncombe family decided to build a new home called Duncombe House. Site evidence of Duncombe House reveals that the 18th century gentleman Thomas Duncombe sought to live in a brand new house, and Helmsley Castle made a perfect romantic ruin in the grounds of the new house, which was designed by renowned architect John Vanbrugh. Source evidence of paintings of Helmsley Castle in a romantic style reveal Helmsley Castle's changed purpose as a romantic ruin and underline what a long-lasting impact the slighting of the castle had. In addition, the fact that a study of the site evidence within the museum and the museum's historical interpretation, with the museum focused on the year of the English Civil War, shows what a huge and pivotal change the English Civil War was on how Helmsley Castle developed after the 17th century. So there you have it, and another example there of linking the site evidence with your analysis. So phrases like site evidence shows the rubble of the East Tower is still within the ditch of the castle, which reinforces how the castle fell into ruin. That's the type of thing you want to do. So there you have it. That's how to answer history around us, Helmsley Castle. 3 takeaways that I want you to take from that presentation. Make sure you decode the question carefully. Cite evidence is absolutely crucial. And remember, 3 sustained explanations. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.